The Family Skeptical, Parenting Through Nonbelief.
We're a married atheist couple raising two wonderful, strange children. We ask big questions, dissect weird parenting beliefs, and examine how society ignores or misrepresents families like ours. If you're any stripe of non-believer who's involved in raising children, welcome. You are our people.
Our kids have heard all our swears, but yours might not have, so be thoughtful if there are young people listening with you.
Well, the rain stopped.
Yeah, it was
A
intense.
lot of rain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thankfully, no hurricanes up here.
No, that was appreciated. Speaking of hurricanes, whenever there's a natural disaster, I always think of that clip. I posted it to our social media a while ago. Anyways, there was a news anchor covering a terrible tornado, and there was a family whose entire house had been destroyed. And the family had survived. And he's talking to the mom, and she's holding her little baby. And the news anchor says, "You just got to thank God, right?" And the woman, without any malice or other sign of distress, gives a very kind smile and says, "Well, actually, we're atheists, so we don't believe in God, but, thanks." And I just think of that clip every time there's a disaster, to just, all the people hurting right now, just try to be thoughtful, because when things are really hard, it doesn't help to also have to try to keep your cool when people's good wishes make you have to deny who you are.
Yeah. But it also bugs me more that those things are said without any degree of sort of self-awareness, because the thanking of God for somebody surviving implicitly means that other people did not.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are, by virtue of thanking God for letting you survive, either saying, overtly or implicitly that God is also at fault for the people getting killed, or that God was powerless to stop those people, but he had the power to save you, but he couldn't get everybody on the life raft. I just can never understand that impulse when people thank God in natural disasters, like any sort of event involving philosophically, like natural evil, as in like something that happens that we would consider to be evil, having like that result of harm happening to humans or whatever, but not being done by a thinking agent. That natural evil isn't also like undercutting the very sort of like goodwill you have toward God that you're expressing in the same moment. It just, I don't know. It just always feels so weird.
It is. But luckily, our weekend was not disaster-filled.
No, we went to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
It was really cool.
But I do want to bring up the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for another reason, which was something that it made me think of as far as like a family event, because we talk about the family events and what our kids are doing and their behaviors and how it's cute or it's indicative of something we have to work on as parents. But in this case, it was a family event and me seeing the boys in action and then realizing something that I had to let go of, which I know a lot of parents probably have gone through as well. And that's the acceptance that your kids are going to be who they are and that you are going to help nurture your kids to be the best versions of who they could potentially be based on their their inclinations, based on their goals, based on, their nature. Because Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is kind of daunting for anybody who's artistic. Because you go in and you're in awe of all the things and the artifacts. And it really brings down to earth how these people that you idolize, they very much were and are real people. They didn't start off as these icons. They started off like, we saw the promo poster for the New York Dolls with Aerosmith of all things opening for them back in the day. And I quizzed the kids as to who, because they already knew who the front man for the New York Dolls was. Because they've seen Scrooged. And I started giving them hints and they're like, oh, wow. Oh my gosh, that was him. And it just, in that moment.
Because he plays the first ghost for people who haven't.
He plays the Ghost of Christmas Past.
Yeah.
And his cab and his stogie and all the swearing. And in that moment, seeing the boys respond to it kind of hit me with this wave of, I guess, regret of all the things that I have not yet achieved that I want to achieve, but also despair that my kids might not be one of those great people. And, we've talked a bit about how over a year ago, I think at this point, but we've talked a bit how you don't need permission to be an artist. You don't need to be paid all the money or get all the accolades to enjoy being an artist or whatever manner of expression that takes for you in your life. But at the same time, as a parent, we want the absolute best for our kids. So if our kids are artistic in any capacity, I think it's natural as parents for us to project that optimal future for them as artists, right? But that's perilous because then it can lead to you negatively framing your kids' artistic output, how much effort they put into what they're doing. If you see that they have promise, but then aren't fulfilling it, then you can lament for their possible future, forgetting that it is their future. And if they are not fully invested in doing this thing, even if they have an aptitude for it, then they're going to be shaping their future around an aptitude and not a passion. And so it was just like a swirl of emotions for me. And it took me a while to just let go of it. Thankfully, not super long, like I did like that sort of like journaling in my head in the moment, self-reflective thing that I've gotten good at through practicing my version of Stoicism. But it did take something because it was very surprising, that feeling. And it took me a second to unpack, be like, wait, what is going on in my head right now? Why am I all of a sudden having like a near panic attack in this museum that I've been looking forward to going to with my folks for like months? And then I got back into like the joy of it and let go of it. But there was a lot of like regret and anxiety, like that just like swept over me. And it was like 100% my worries as a parent, seeing my kids not necessarily taking the time early in life to focus on these things that they could be focusing on that could give them great artistic success in the future, or great success in whatever field they could potentially excel in. Because, we just started watching MasterChef Junior and we watched The Voice, and there are plenty of examples of, young kids that are out there in the public eye that are already great at what they do and just get better over time.
Yeah.
And as parents, we want that for our kids, regardless of what it is that they choose to focus on, right? But I didn't expect for, okay, fine. Ideally, we should be good at identifying what our kids are good at and what their passions are, helping them chart that sort of like Venn diagram of their passion and aptitude, helping them see opportunities and possibilities for advancement within that, and then have the happiest, most productive life possible.
Yeah.
But that a lot of that is outside of our control. And so it was definitely like a weird moment that I didn't expect as a parent. But I don't know. Do you have anything from the trip to the museum that was like a parenting moment for you?
Well, it's so interesting you bring that up. I mean, it's intriguing because, you are a talented musician. I have one of the worst ears ever, but I do love music. And I've just sort of been waiting for the boys to be really moved by music. And in some ways, they have been. I mean, it's sort of absurd, but, Fortnite does a lot with collaborations with different musicians. And It has been cool to see Reader get really excited by those. And, they both loved Rocket Man, the movie about Elton John, so much. And they kind of like the Elvis movie too. So they have been intrigued by different musicians. But I don't think I've seen either of them like really into music as a thing. Like they get interested in a person, but I haven't seen it bleed over into, man, I love music and I just want to experience all of it,
Yeah, for sure.
And so I was kind of curious about going because I knew there were more musicians that they would sort of recognize. So yeah, so I'm just curious about that. And I think in kind of a similar way, I am curious about if ever, those things will kind of hit them. The same as with different kinds of art. I mean, I think Reader is at a point where when we go to art museums, like he really engages. And it's not like he loves all art, but he gets involved. And it's kind of been up and down with Go. It was interesting because his class went to the local art museum on a field trip. And for a kid who for a while there was sort of complaining about when we decided to do art museums, he was actually really mad that they didn't get to see more of it and talked about wanting to go back. So that was interesting to see. But yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's been such a bigger challenge because I don't know, like I went to a school where a lot of my good friends are successful creatively in like really significant ways, where they are like known in their industry and big names. And if you look at my accomplishments compared to them, like I'm nothing, And so I think I've had to go on a real journey with that because I think we have a tendency to only, sort of value art when it is also succeeding in a capitalist system.
Correct.
And I know there are people who have had amazing careers and a huge amount of happiness and accomplishment from succeeding in that way. But I know as many people who, even though they have that kind of outside success, haven't felt that accomplishment. And I had to go through a period where I was thinking about the art that mattered the most to me.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the people I care about, like, did not work in those capitalist systems, or their art that I care about the most is from when they were far from successful.
Mm-hmm.
And, for myself, I realized, like, I love David Lynch. He's one of my favorite directors. I worked in film for a while, and the whole reason I went into film is because of him, because I always liked movies. And then I saw his films, and it was the first time that it occurred to me that, like, it was people making movies.
Mm-hmm.
Because there is, especially his early works. And literally, I mean, like, I think literally when you watch his short films, it was like him alone in an attic doing something. And that kind of like homemade, I'm off in my backyard making something is what I loved so deeply.
Mm-hmm.
But then when I got into the industry, like, to make movies, it's the opposite of that. It's all about getting other people's buy-in and, getting other people to trust you and to help you on your project and give money. And I kind of realized I had fucked up because what I loved wasn't what the industry was. And particularly with parenting, everybody that I saw that was getting successful in entertainment, they just traveled all the time. And I think you can be an amazing parent and travel a ton for work.
Mm-hmm.
It just wasn't what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to rethink everything. And I had to, I mean, like, look, we're doing this podcast in our office, right?
Yeah.
And I had to come to grips with the fact that the artistic projects that made me the happiest
Mm-hmm.
were like me futzing around in my closet. And that was not going to be recognized or ever have that kind of status. And that was really hard. And I think, so I try to think about the boys the same way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if they show a huge aptitude for something, I'll do everything to support them, and a
Mm-hmm.
huge interest. But I'm trying, and I don't think I'm successful all the time, but I am trying very hard to give them the grace that it took me so much time to give myself.
Mm-hmm.
So I really get it. And I think it's okay, I think it's okay to have smaller lives. I don't think it changes one's value.
No, and that's one of the things that I hate about social media is that you ultimately can reframe your entire life as a FOMO.
Yeah.
And then you just end up devaluing yourself. And like, you look at how many people there are on the planet, and then you start to think about the number of people doing the thing that you think is so important. Then you realize what the odds are. And then you talk to them about what they did to get there. And yeah, they had talent, but also there's a lot of just being prepared and in the correct place at the correct time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not necessarily like I know a lot of great writers, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're all going to have the careers that they want. And one thing that moving around so much has helped me realize is that stories are everywhere because they're always rooted in people and their fears and their dreams. And that you do yourself a disservice as a storyteller to think that your career can only happen in one place doing one thing. And the moment that I did that, I essentially forgave myself for not being successful in this narrow window that I thought that I needed to be successful in. And in so doing, I allowed myself to grow as a writer, to be better than I ever have been. And such that when I do get, that big opportunity, because, opportunities come around, then I will actually be ready for it instead of assuming I'm ready for it because I am doing the thing in the place where I should be by my idea of what that means, which is complete bullshit. I was doing the opposite of what I should have been doing all along. So like you, it took me a long time to finally accept myself as myself. It feels very similar to my journey towards understanding my brain and accepting that I am neurodivergent. That there's so much that I assumed I knew about myself that I sort of shut off even an internal conversation about it.
Yeah.
That I assumed what I was doing was right, how I was doing it was right, because I was doing it that way. And I guess I hadn't self-destructed, which is a completely nonsensical metric for success. Right?
Yeah.
But then, like with all the metrics of choosing where we should live, I looked at what I actually valued. And then I realized that if I really value being a better storyteller, I have to allow myself to live a life that engages with the world and generates those stories. And that can take place anywhere. And in this post-COVID world, so much of every industry, including writing, is now hybrid or remote.
Yeah. Well,
it was just really fascinating to sort of hit me like a ton of bricks right there. Like, because we were just right there in front of the punk exhibit. And I was like, I love this. This is my shit right here. This is so cool. Oh my gosh. It's Johnny Ramone's boots.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, Johnny Ramone at one point was wearing those boots. He is strip his icon status away, a short ass dude doing an awesome thing. So I don't need to feel like I'm less than, because I'm also a person doing my thing, and that, my opportunity will come just like his came. His came earlier in life. Mine is going to come later in life, and that's okay.
Well, my dad's amazing partner introduced me to Patti Smith. And so I was like sending her pictures because they had some of her handwritten postcards. And then there was a Women in Rock exhibit. So they had, speaking of
so
boots.
Cool.
Yeah. They had her boots, which were like duct taped together. And
not Johnny Ramone. Whose boots were they? I forget. Never mind.
Yeah.
It might have been Dee Dee's. I can't remember.
But they had her boots, with the duct tape on them. And her book, Just Kids, was so important in my thinking about all this, because there is such not that narratives of great artists are all the same, but I feel like with a lot of artists, there's a certain kind of selfishness involved in working towards their goals and their success. And you see a lot of artists who have, made big sacrifices to get where they are. And to read her book, and, that book is as much about her art as it is about her caring for the people in her life. And I know she took off huge swatches of time to be with her kids and made decisions that a lot of other people, didn't make. And it probably drastically changed her career. And she's still this like towering force when you think about her. And her music is like no one else's ever has been. So it's an intense thing.
It is. But it shouldn't have to be. So yeah, stay off social media, protect your mental health. Moving on.
So last week, we had the pleasure of speaking with Betsy Deville, who is an artist and a writer. And we spoke with her about her book, Grief for Atheists, A Compassionate Guide with Evidence-Based Strategies to Navigate Your Loss. And it was such a great conversation. I wasn't able to fit all of it in that episode. If you didn't hear it, you should really go back because she is such an amazing thinker.
Betsy's cool.
But here is a little bit that we weren't able to fit in.
And learning more about my own neurodivergence made me appreciate how something like video games, which I've always loved, are an example of that, because it's a stimulation and you get the satisfaction of success, but it's something that over which you have a great degree of control. So even when everything around you is going nuts and you feel like you don't have any agency, you can hold the controller and make the character do what you want and exert that psychological need on at least something. And so that's why when we were in this transitional period, I was less concerned with how much video game time the boys had, because it is that opportunity for them to express that need, even when we're like sleeping on the floor of the living room and the cats are locked in a room and there are boxes piled up around them like it's a fortress. And it's just like everything is nuts, that I didn't want them to also feel like, no, you can't also have this thing that gives you some sense of solace. And I think there's something maybe larger to think about there that I'm going to, on my own, sort of pick over. But I think that giving them the opportunity, even in like, again, like this sort of this version of grief, that opportunity to feel like, okay, I can handle this and I can handle that, but I can't handle that. That we as parents say, okay, this and this we keep on the plate, but this other thing that they already pushed back against, we just let it drop. We write it down. We talk about it amongst ourselves. How can we reintroduce that idea as a team, maybe a couple beats down the road, and after they've had a chance to process it? Because sometimes introducing an idea to a kid is the act, and then revisiting it later to try to get some closure, some conclusion to it is what's needed, and not just doing it. Oh, I've introduced this thing. Let's conclude it now. Like you're in a board meeting. Like it doesn't work that way with kids.
Mm-hmm. Have you read a book called Super Better by Dr. Jane McGonigal? Are you familiar with her work?
Not at all.
Mm-hmm. Your commentary on video games made me think of that. So she is, she works in the gaming industry.
Okay.
Super Better is actually, I would call it a game she came up with. I wouldn't consider it a traditional video game because I think it's just sort of a concept more than anything. I think she did a TED Talk too, if you want like the shorter version. But the notion is really what you're describing, which is gaming is a deliberate choice to do something hard. Mm-hmm. Right? And it's an opportunity for us to observe that we can get better with practice. Mm-hmm. And so Super Better, she dealt with a pretty serious concussion and a very long recovery. Oof. And so this is something she came up with as she was going through the recovery from concussion. And there's some of the concepts in there that you might really enjoy as far as how to kind of gamify that experience and how gamification for hard things, not necessarily grief, but for hard things can be really, really effective because when you put yourself in that play mindset, you're much more open to hard things. Like when you jump into a new game, a new video game, or board game or, whatever, it's going to be hard. You're going to lose a couple boss fights, but you're going to keep trying, right? You're going to keep trying. And it's a great opportunity to practice that. In fact, when I give talks, when I talk to folks about how to support someone who's experiencing grief, I talk about gaming as a great opportunity. It's a great opportunity for self-support for entering flow state, as long as it doesn't become an escape, right? Where you're not actually dealing with things, right? There's a balance there for sure. So you have to tread carefully, but also gaming can be helpful for if I'm supporting a friend who's experiencing grief. One thing that's nice about gaming or any other activity that has a beginning, a middle, and an end is everybody kind of knows what their job is. Right. Yeah. And so we're going to play this game together. I cannot talk, like if you and I are playing video games, if the three of us are online and we're gaming and we're on Discord and we're doing whatever, we're going to be focused on what accomplishments do we have in the game.
Right.
We may talk about other things, but we also may not. And we have permission kind of for both in that sort of social setting. That's, I think, somewhat unique to video games and gaming. But that's also a great thing, gaming with your kids. Like if, if they're experiencing grief, maybe it's time to learn to play video games. So you have that time with them. Yeah, if you haven't played video games with your kids, any parents out there, I highly recommend. I remember when one of my kids came to me and was like, Mom, you need to learn to play video games. And I've chosen just the game. And we spent the whole summer playing. And it was,
what was the game? Can I ask?
So fun. We played Stardew Valley. Have you played?
Oh, I have not, but I'm familiar with it. That's cool. Yeah.
Stardew Valley is the way.
So if you want to hear more of that interview, go back to our last episode and definitely check out Betsy Deville. She has an amazing shop at betsydeville.com where it'll link to Grief for Atheists and her Grief for Atheists care package and a ton of other awesome stuff, jewelry and ornaments and just really cool things for atheists. And you can also find her on Etsy at Betsy Deville, and we will link to all of those places in the show notes. Okay, Pops. I have something to talk about that I've been wanting to talk about since the start of the podcast.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm
nervous now.
Well, I feel like we might be heading towards our biggest disagreement yet, but I don't know. We will see. So I want to talk about indoctrination. Because one of the things I feel most out of step with other atheist parents that I have heard talk about being an atheist parent is this idea of indoctrination. Because I think atheist parents go to great strides not to indoctrinate their children as atheists because of their negative experiences feeling like they were indoctrinated into Christianity.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of atheist parents go too far. And so I want to talk about indoctrination.
Okay.
How do you feel about indoctrinating our kids into atheists?
How do I feel about indoctrinating our kids into atheists? I think that it's more important. Like I've talked about this on the podcast before, and I've talked about this with them at length over the years, several times. I would have a harder time accepting them not being as humanist as they are right now than I would them, starting to adhere to a religion. There's a certain degree of anti-theism that I hold, because when you allow yourself to believe, or when you believe because we don't necessarily choose our beliefs, when you believe that, disembodied minds that control us or guide us or inform our actions or impose moral codes on the universe or whatever, when those things exist, and then when you can't necessarily demonstrate them in a convincing way to other people, but you still believe they exist, then that sort of magical thinking can lead you to believe other things that you can't justify. And that can be, harmful potentially, because you can be a humanist and a Christian, or a humanist and a Muslim. You can be a pagan and a humanist, but ultimately, like, the humanism is the set of values. And even if you believe that, your humanism is a reflection of your God, right? That nonetheless, where the rubber meets the road lines up with the other pro-social, empathy-driven, science-based attitudes and developments that everybody can, well, not everybody, but most people agree on most of the time, which is what glues society together and allows us to keep going. So I would say the humanism thing matters to me more. I would say that if they're not going to be skeptical about a religious claim to a degree that I would, then I can't control that. But I wouldn't worry unless that lack of skepticism leading to a religious belief then leads them to do something like think that trans people are subhuman, or that, the earth is flat and we shouldn't fund the NEA, or that NOAA should be disbanded because space lasers, or like the rabbit hole is what I worry about. And so humanism and skepticism matter more to me than the religious beliefs.
So I think one of the issues is, and look, dictionary, I'm going to prove that like dictionary definitions are so hard, right? Because before discussing this, I was like, all right, what is the definition of indoctrination?
Mm-hmm.
And if you go to Merriam-Webster, the first definition is to imbue with the usually partisan or sectarian opinion, point of view, or principle. Okay?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
But then if you just go to dictionary.com, the main definition is the process of teaching a person or group to accept a set of beliefs uncritically. So those are very different.
Okay.
Right? I at least to me, those are very different. And I was like, oh, maybe this is the whole problem. Because if we go with that dictionary.com definition, to teach a person or group to accept a set of beliefs uncritically, like, yeah, I never want to do that with our kids. Never. And I never want to suggest that they should believe something just because I told them.
Mm-hmm.
Or that they can't question it, right? And I think that can be incredibly harmful if you're being told things, particularly as a child, that you're told, that people are telling you to believe just because. But then if we go to the other definition, to imbue a partisan or sectarian opinion, this is where I don't quite line up with some other atheists I've seen, because, like Seth Andrews will sometimes post questions and just kind of comments online. People will often say, teaching kids that they're going to go to hell is child abuse. And I think there is a way to do that that is 100% child abuse, without a doubt. But if you truly believe that a hell exists, I don't know how you don't teach your kids about it. Like, what are parents supposed to do? Like, part of being a parent is helping your kid understand the world. And there is a lot of good in that and a lot of bad in that. And the challenging job is to teach them about the things that are bad or scary in a way that will hopefully prepare them and keep them safer than they would have been without unduly freaking them out.
Well, then why don't you just think about kicking the can down the road and saying things like, some people believe that hell is real. Here's what some people think hell is. Some people think hell is this. Some people think hell is that. Some people think that hell is eternal punishment. Some think it's just separation from God. Some think it's eternal. Some think it's temporary. Some think that when you're there, you can do things that help you understand God and appease God. And then you leave hell and you go to heaven. You can talk about the varieties of beliefs, right? That's just like teaching comparative mythology. And then you say, whatever you end up deciding, I encourage you to investigate it yourself. And then you stop the conversation.
Yeah, we can do that.
Right.
we can do that.
Right. But then
But
that's
if you-
not us indoctrinating. That's all.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I'm talking about Christian parents.
Right.
If you
but you
believe-
started off by saying like indoctrination. That made me think like atheists indoctrinating their children to be atheists.
Yeah. Well, that too. Okay.
Okay.
So
okay.
I think if you believe you know what hell is, and you believe you know the rules of how to stay out, I don't know how you don't talk to your kids about that.
Right, but that doesn't make it necessarily moral. That means that you think you're acting morally, but unless you can demonstrate it, then you're not necessarily acting morally. You're making a subjective determination that what you're doing is a good thing for your children.
Yeah, but like that is what we do as parents, right?
Right. I'm not saying that. I'm not going to blame parents for doing that. I don't necessarily think it. I don't agree with that appraisal that it's necessarily child abuse. Like there are ways that it can be abusive,
of
course.
But
telling them isn't necessarily child abuse.
Yeah,
and just like religion isn't necessarily mental illness. I totally differ with a lot of what I guess you would call new atheists when it comes, not atheists who are newly atheists, but like the movement of capital N new atheism that might consider religion to be this deranged harm, blight upon society. Like I, as a consequentialist, care more about what the people do more than I care about what they believe.
Yeah. I mean, I think like just based on my own life and experience, I don't want the boys to ever own motorcycles. And I don't want them to ever own guns.
Okay.
Right? Every single person I have ever known, and yes, this is like circumstantial evidence, but every single person I have ever known who has owned a motorcycle and used it often has been in a fairly serious accident. And you can be the best driver in the world, but you can't control other drivers around you. And in a car, you are in a steel box designed for your protection. And if you are on a motorcycle, you aren't. To me, it's a ridiculous risk. And look, there are other perspectives. There are people who love motorcycles, who 100% would argue that the enjoyment and camaraderie, and I'm sure a ton of stuff that I would never think about, is like well worth it, right? Mm-hmm. Or that there are ways, safety things I'm not considering. And that is fine. But as a parent, I know at a certain point I won't be able to stop them. But as a parent, I am going to keep telling them, I don't want you to ever own a gun. I don't want you to ever own a motorcycle. Right? And guns, I don't even care about all the statistics of the fact that, like, if your house gets broken into, it is much more likely that that gun is going to be used against you. There is depression and suicide in my family. I know those things can come on unexpected and quickly. Mm-hmm. And I don't want them ever owning guns. I think it is a completely unreasonable risk. And you can think that your mental health is fine and it's not going to be you.
Right.
And you don't know. Right? At a certain point, and there are people who can argue, like, of course it's good to own a, I mean, obviously, this is like the debate we're having in our country, right? But I am going to keep telling them that I believe these things are dangerous. I believe terrible consequences come from these things, and I don't want you doing it.
Well, unlike with the religious stuff, you actually have, data that you didn't collect yourself to back up your position. Like you can say, this scares me because, and you lay out the reasons that other people can investigate and perhaps come to, the same conclusion as you, or perhaps come to another conclusion, but at the very least, it's falsifiable. It's not some sort of internal state that you can't ever quantify or communicate adequately to another person. Like NDEs proving that heaven exists or whatever,
But it's
not the same.
And I agree with you. And I am an atheist. And there are plenty of Christians who think that their belief is well proved. And I think they're wrong. I agree with you. I think all that evidence that they bring up is bad.
And there are plenty of Christians that agree with you that we shouldn't, militarize society, and that, everybody having guns all over the place, it does not make society more safe. It makes society less safe.
But I think, so what brought this up for me again is now I went away from it because I had to pull up the definitions. So Free Inquiry, which is one of the publications of the Center for Inquiry.
Okay, right. Yes.
I have real mixed feelings about the Center for Inquiry.
We've talked about them before on the podcast.
But I still follow their stuff. And so they had an article by Robert Allen called My Children, the Atheists, and how he raised his children to be critical thinkers. And in this article, he says, I never told my children I'm an atheist, yet my children are themselves atheists. So look, I am everybody to their own, right? And I am glad he raised his kids to be critical thinkers. I think that's one of the most important things you can do as a parent.
Yes. Speaking of media literacy and perceptions in social media, again.
But I can't imagine not telling my kids that I was an atheist. Like, I hear people do this stuff all the time, and it seems like that seems a level of hands-offness because of this like weird fear of being overly indoctrinating that I just think is a step too far. Like, being a parent is so hard. It is so challenging. There is so much about it that is scary and trying and not fun.
Mm-hmm.
And what makes it worthwhile is getting to know your kids and letting them get to know you and talking about big things and getting their perspectives and sharing yours and changing their mind and having them change yours. You know what I mean?
Sure, yeah.
And I feel like so many atheists are so concerned about not overly influencing their children towards atheism because they feel they were overly influenced towards religion.
Sure.
That they like cut out all the fun. And I just can't imagine. That seems so hard for no reason.
Yeah. I can't understand that. But that's not true. I can understand that. I can't ever picture myself doing that. Like, I mean, clearly. I come from a position of privilege, though, because I did not grow up in a household where me coming out as an atheist was a fraught decision where I lost friends and family. It was not a dilemma for me.
Yes.
Like, I've always had this relationship with my parents and my community, and I've been very fortunate. So I've come from a place of privilege. If I did not, then my perception of my lack of belief would be different. And my perception of how I would communicate and be open about my lack of belief would be different. And in caring for and loving my children, I would necessarily have strong feelings about how I communicate my lack of belief or potentially bring that out in them. And maybe it leads me to do, as we were skirting around, indoctrinate my kids into atheism, to inoculate them from this thing that was so perilous for me. Or maybe it encourages me to never talk about it. But I'm not going to stand in judgment of a parent making that decision out of love for their children because I'm not living their life.
Yeah. No, I think it's much harder when you are in a place where, and I actually just saw this somewhere on social media. Somebody posted, what do I do if my kid talks about being an atheist? Because I could lose my job if people find out I'm not religious.
That's hard.
Like,
I can't even imagine.
Awful.
Yeah, that's heartbreaking.
So that I am not talking about.
Like, how
that.
do you have that conversation with your kid? Like, don't talk about like what our family is. We have to hide, right? It's like Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I can't, I feel so bad for people.
Let me be very clear. I am not judging that at all.
No.
That is a kind of hell I don't want to think about.
Yeah.
I feel so much sympathy for people in those positions, and I judge nobody who is doing what they need to do to survive. So that is not what I'm talking about. I am talking about people making that choice based on a philosophical stance. And look, I do remember reading somewhere online where somebody talked about their dad making it very clear that he thought anybody who wasn't an atheist was, not intelligent, not worth the time.
Right.
And that to me is closer to the kinds of bad Christian.
Well, it's bigotry. I mean,
exactly.
I can't get behind it. Like that would be, in my mind, like leaning anti-humanist.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
like not all atheists are skeptics. Not all atheists are humanists. And it's really important in this day and age where so much of society is divided on political lines that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
But except in a case like that, where you're worried about losing somebody you love's sort of respect and care,
mm-hmm.
I just don't think telling kids about atheism is ever going to have quite the same threat of bad indoctrination
mm-hmm.
as certain religions that have punishments for not believing in them.
Okay.
Because there is no, or better, there is no punishment attached, right?
Sure.
Like on one side, you have, in some belief systems, like the most horrible punishment you could imagine as the consequence.
Right.
And like I said, except if you have a parent or caregiver who's making their love and care and all of that conditional, like there's not
mm-hmm.
a punishment for not believing in atheism.
Well, that's
right?
not necessarily true. There isn't a metaphysical or divine punishment. But like with leaving a religious community, and as you deconstruct, you could have a social consequence.
Yeah, for sure. But I don't think it's going to be like on the far side of religion. It is, not like it's not life or death. It's like happy death versus bad death. But it is just a bigger deal than even those social consequences.
Sure.
But yeah, no, there are definitely, certainly there are places and friend groups where becoming religious would have big implications. Because I know I think you've talked a lot more, maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like you've talked more about wanting to not overly influence the boys than I have.
I think that's fair. And we can have different opinions about, wanting to, indoctrinate the kids, as it were. Because, ultimately, I think that when it comes to doing things, we discuss things before doing them.
Mm-hmm.
We don't act unilaterally when it comes to that. Like we have a very open relationship and we both prize dialogue about these things. So I'm not worried about like the actions, even if we have different values about certain aspects of parenting.
Yeah. And I wouldn't say I'm like trying to make atheists, but I don't know if I'm like spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to make sure I'm not doing that, I guess.
Yeah. It could be that I'm just more careful about it and I just choose my words more.
To be fair, you are more critical of religion often than I am.
That's also fair.
Yeah, I don't know. I just think it's sort of interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of food for thought. But yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, of course. All right, let's wrap it up. We need to thank Jonathan Zalbin and First Frame Music for the music for this podcast.
So that concludes this episode of The Family Skeptical, where nothing is sacred except for our kids.
Pops, do I still sound okay? I just changed a setting on my mic because I'm a professional.
I'm sorry, what? You're muted.
Oh, harsh.
That was T-ball. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You sound
Still
fine.
okay? Okay.
I love you.
Love
Yeah.
you too.